Hey guys, Jeff Cunningham here, and I am your host of the Consistently Good podcast by BPM. I'm here today to talk to you about my favorite thing, and that's the marathon. Listen, it's no secret. I've coached everything from 800 meters to ultra marathons, everything in between, 10Ks, 5Ks, half marathons. But let's face it, I have this indescribable sort of bottomless pit of love for this thing that we call the marathon. The marathon is a race that so many people know about. It's a race that so many people talk about. It is part of our culture. It's part of pretty much the sporting culture of every nation in the world. Marathon is a term that's taken on a life of its own. I mean, think about it. You go and you sit at a baseball game and it goes 12, 13 innings. They say that was a marathon of a contest. Or maybe down at the state legislature, somebody filibusters for forever and they say it was a marathon of a speech. And so it's a sport, and specifically an event that's woven sort of into the tapestry of the sporting culture domestically in the United States and internationally. But you know, it's interesting. It comes with tragedy. It comes with triumph. It comes with political implications. It is part of the tales of distress, and there's wartime stories. There are stories that simply come out of the marathon that has made it almost, I would say, larger than life. Now, when we talk about the marathon, why do I love it so much? It's actually one of the most detailed of the Olympic distances to actually coach. It's one of the most detailed of the Olympic distances. And when I say that, I mean from the 100-meter dash all the way to the marathon, right? To race, to run, to execute. You have this interplay of dealing with a course that's variable. You have to deal with the elements. You have to deal with the conditions. You have to deal with the crowds. You have to deal with understanding fueling needs. And so it's a complex, but incredibly gratifying and satisfying in sort of this emotional roller coaster of an event to participate in and to coach. When you look at barriers to entry, why do I love the marathon so much? There's such a low barrier to entry. You can go and you can pay your $150, $200, whatever it might be, and you get to toe the line with Olympic champions, Olympians, national champions, your buddy down the block. And it's a fascinating display of sportsmanship when you see all of these people from all of these walks of life all get on a starting line together. Now, when I'm talking about barriers to entry, you know, if you want to go and you want to be a professional 100-meter runner, or you want to be a professional 5K runner, you have a limited number of track meets or events that you can run in. They're difficult to get into because you typically have to meet time standards, right? You go to the fabled Bislett Games in Oslo, Norway. You have to be a world-class runner to get into those races, right? You go to a meet in Hengelo in the Netherlands where they host one of the great track meets in the world every year. You don't just get to show up and say, I want to run, but you sure do with the Berlin Marathon. You sure do with the London Marathon if you can get in through application process, lottery, right? But then look at marathons worldwide. You simply pay your entry fee, you go and you train your ass off, and you show up. And if you beat everybody, you won. And you can simply sort of choose your own adventure. And that's why I love the marathon so much. I love coaching the marathon as well, because when you coach it, you get to be part of this multifaceted, multicultural, multi-talented, multi-goal, meaning some people's goal, I'm going to go and be the best runner of all time. I want to win it. Some people are saying, hey, I want to do this for my uncle who couldn't be here today because he may be infirmed or may not be here anymore. Some people say, I'm doing it for me. I'm doing it to prove to myself that I can do hard things. And the cool thing about it is every one of those reasons is legitimate. And we all run the marathon, and we all go to the starting line, and we all fist bump, and we all high five because your uncle's proud of you, and then you run, and you're proud of you, and then the guy who wins it runs, and he's proud of himself. And everybody can get to that starting line, and every finish line after you've gone to that starting line is meaningful. Whether you're crawling, whether you're walking, whether you're sprinting across the line, every finish line is meaningful. And I've been to many, many finish lines and marathons myself, running in them. Some good, yeah, some disastrous. But I can tell you every time I crossed that line, I never said, boy, I sure regret that. Every single time it was an adventure. Every single time it was a soul-filling experience. Every single time it was also a soul-searching experience. You go into this bizarro land of discovery sometimes where you're going to these deep, dark places, these recesses of your soul that I've talked about before in years past. You learn so much, and the marathon teaches us a lot. Every year, you realize how many people run marathons, but how few people actually run marathons. Where am I going with this? 0.014%, not 14%, not 1.4%, not 0.14%, but 0.014%. That's 14 one-thousandths of a percent of the world runs a marathon annually. That means that when you go and you run a marathon, you are more exceptional than perhaps you would believe. And so that's part of the coaching part that I love about the marathon. And when you think about some of them, the huge marathons, right? And when you're looking at Boston, New York, and Chicago in the United States, okay, those alone comprise a massive number of the people who run a marathon in the United States every year. Here's what people don't really think about is the economic impact of the marathon. These events are so large and they bring in so many people because think about it. You go to a marathon. I think London had, oh gosh, don't get me lying, guys. Many of you may know, I think 50,000. I think this year was the number. I think Berlin's close to that. I want to say Boston was about 22,000. And it's not because Boston isn't as sort of a famous marathon as those others. There are some functional reasons. Obviously, qualifying is incredibly difficult. But also, look at the starting line in Hopkinton. I mean, it's on a narrow, almost a country-ish road, right, outside of Boston. But even then, 22,000 is just a massive race, right? But the economic impact of these is fascinating. And I was doing some reading before I came on to sort of familiarize myself with how much these marathons actually impact their local economies. If you look at New York, Chicago, Boston, they're all between $490 and $550 million of economic impact for those communities. And we're talking about an event that takes 6 hours from start to finish. You look at hotels, you look at flights, you look at recreational outings. I mean, people want to go to the Boston Red Sox. People are staying in hotels. People, and it's not just the runners, it's their families, it's their coaches, it's their agents, it's sponsors, it's corporate partners. These are a big deal, right? And Boston, New York, and Chicago bring in, on average, about $500 million, like I said, annually to their local communities economically. Charity. Here's what's really cool. Listen, obviously everybody has their favorite charitable organizations. Charity is a big part of what so many people, especially in modern Western industrialized nations, lean into. And So I looked at the global charitable contributions that come from people running marathons. You can think about any one of the number of charitable organizations that will actually even sometimes let you get a bib, right, to go and run in a marathon. And people run for cancer research, multiple sclerosis. I just had a runner back in August run the Sydney Marathon, and she actually met somebody out on the running course who was also had multiple sclerosis, and they're trying to do fundraising, right? So the top 50 marathons in the world raised, get this, $430 million in charitable donations to go to various foundations, like I said, whether it's cancer research or concerns about child welfare or women's health or multiple sclerosis or what have you. So marathons serve a really, really important purpose. And so I think there's a lot of people that think, oh, well, that's just frivolity. I'm going to go and run my marathon, and then there's going to be some guy that's going to put a 26.2 sticker on the back of his car, right? Well, these are massive, massive events that have massive economic impacts on their locales and are used as conduits through which massive, massive amounts of money is raised for all kinds of worthy causes. And so it's pretty cool that marathons themselves have taken this on, and marathons have become this, because the reality of it is there are other sports that engage in charity. They have a part, obviously, in the professional leagues of having massive economic impacts at their locales. Because I mean, if you're paying, a 100-game schedule, and whether it's an NBA season or baseball, that stands to reason, right? But it's interesting when you can have one event, one weekend a year, and that's all in New York, in Boston, in Chicago. You have the London Marathon, right? You have the Houston Marathon. You have Tokyo Marathon. You have the Sydney Marathon. All these marathons in these wonderful, wonderful cities all over the world. One weekend a year, massive economic impact. Marathons. Who ran the first one? And, you see these memes and you see these hilarious stand-up comics that say, you people that run these marathons, you understand that it's optional, right? Like, you don't have to do it, and then you see chafing, and you see bloody shirts and bloody feet and blisters and people puking, and, well, yeah, that's part of it, but you see the joy and you see the fulfillment. But was there joy for the first guy that ran the marathon? Well, probably not a lot, other than he was happy with the message that he was carrying with him. Did it end well for the first guy who ran the first marathon? Not so much. So in 490 BC, guys, that's a long time ago. That's like before the invention of the iPhone, I think. 490 BC, Phidippides runs from Marathon to Athens, carrying one simple message, that they had defeated, this is the Greeks, had defeated the Persians in battle. And so he ran from Marathon to Athens, and he said, we won. And he collapsed and he died. And if that is an inauspicious beginning to what now has become one of the world's foremost sporting events and one of the world's most participated in sporting events, I don't know if there's a worse start. All right. So this guy, and I mean, think about it, guys. It's 490 BC. So let's think about what this guy was wearing. One thing I can guarantee you he wasn't wearing was carbon-plated sandals. All right. He wasn't wearing Nike 4% sandals to run from Carthage to Athens. My guess is he was either barefooted or he was running in something where most of our plantar fascias would probably rupture within the first 2 miles. This guy ran 24.8 miles and died. And you say, but Jeff, 24.8 miles, what the hell are you talking about? Well, 24.8 miles is actually how far marathons were for a bit of time, okay? So this poor guy, Phidippides, was told by his general to run to Athens, tell them that we won, we beat the Persians. So the guy runs in his carbon-plated sandals, Achilles tendon, and plantar fascia, probably pulled loose from its moorings. He says, we won, and he died. Well, considering the fact that that happened, I guess it shouldn't come as some massive surprise that it took a couple, like a millennia, right? Or however long it was to 1896 for some idiot to try it again. Well, let's fast forward to 1896. March 11th, 1896, they decided to have some trials in Greece to see who would be able to make the Olympic Games. The Olympics were in Athens in 1896, and this is the first time that marathon had actually been contested. And so the first marathon that was actually contested was in March of 1896, and 3:18 won it. And then they ran a second trials race after that, and I think my recollection is I think it was 3:11 won that one. Now, I'm not sure the exact process by which they chose their team, but at the 1896 Olympics, we had 17 guys in the marathon. Notice I said guys. No women were allowed to run the marathon in 1896 at the Olympic Games, okay? So you had 17 guys showing up to run the marathon at the 1896 Olympic Games, the first one since, ever, right? But in March of 1896, that was the first marathon since 490 BC that anybody was dumb enough to try this. Now, when I say dumb enough, of course, I'm saying this very, very tongue-in-cheek, but you have to understand that in 1896, and frankly, for many, many years, if not decades after that, there was all these scare tactics, all of these concerns about the health risks. Frankly, it was this sort of maudlin display of masochism that very, very few people wanted to participate in, but there was a whole lot of people that were interested in going and watching this like it was, some sort of bizarre display at a museum or some sort of a freak show, right? And so in 1896, these 17 hardy souls towed the line. 13 of the 17 were Greeks, and there was 4 people in the race who weren't Greek. Now, for me to tell you that these first marathons were well organized and that these first marathons were without event would be a gross exaggeration of the truth. The reality is these things were dumpster fires. Some of you might call them a shiitake show, if you know what I'm getting at, right? Holy mackerel, guys. This stuff is great. I mean, you sit there and you read about these first marathons, and you just shake your head absolutely cracking up. But you wonder if 100 years from now, people are going to look at what we're doing at marathons right now, and they're going to shake their head and they're going to crack up. But guys, this is legendary. So Spyridon Louis from Greece actually won the first Olympic marathon in 1896 in 2:58:50. I would like to point out, though, and remind you guys, 24.8 miles. This was not 26.2 miles, okay? So he ran 2:58:50 in a marathon and beat the other 16 runners. Now, what went down in this marathon is hysterical because obviously it would never happen today, but this is legendary. So there was a guy from France, and he showed up, and this guy was crushing souls and stomping necks, man. This dude was out, right? So the father of Louis, who won it, and this is what the legend says, the father had the Frenchman stop at some point during the race. I don't know exactly when. And he got him drunk on cognac, all right? This dude cramped up. This dude fell apart, and then Spyridon Louis at some point passed him and ended up going on for the win. Now, there's another story that says that this Frenchman, in a fashion that I think any good Frenchman could respect, had an affinity for wine. He loved wine. So one version of the story is that this guy stopped and ducked into a pub or a restaurant or something and sat there and got sauced on wine and then was too intoxicated to actually be able to run down the road and either collapsed, dropped out, cramped, whatever happened when you try to run a marathon when you're drunk at the Olympics. Irregardless, this Frenchman was either sabotaged by Luis's father or in self-sabotage because he'd had such an affinity for the alcoholic wine, grape juice that he went and got himself sauced. He lost. Now, you got to feel bad for good old Edwin Flack. Edwin Flack was from Australia, so he was one of the 4 non-Greeks in the race. And Edwin Flack actually led the race after our lovely drunk French guy collapsed and passed out and cramped and rolled up in the fetal position. We don't really know. Edwin Flack led for 26K, so that's about 16 miles. Edwin apparently had more guts than sense. Edwin decided he was going to show up for the marathon, and apparently he hadn't really trained very much. So he faked it, and he thought he was going to make it. And at 26 miles, he actually collapsed. All right. And so here you got the French guy laying down in his own drunken drool on the side of the road. You got Edwin Flack laying in a pile of unfit rubbish somewhere on the side of the road. And here's Luis that goes traipsing by, okay, and ends up winning. Now, here's what's hilarious. Greeks went first, second, and third. The third place guy, who initially was awarded the bronze medal, he ended up getting DQ'd. Now, keep in mind, it's not like you had cameras on the front of the Valero or the Exxon station that caught him cheating. It's not like you had television cameras or, eye in the sky from a helicopter. There were witnesses that saw this guy get in a carriage, and he actually had the carriage drive him within a few kilometers of Olympic Stadium, and then he gets out, and then he runs into the stadium, and he gets third. And then everybody who was back down the road said, whoa, wait a minute, this guy caught a carriage. So he ended up getting DQ'd. The guy who got fourth moved into third place. And there you have the 1896 Olympic Marathon. Luis is interesting in that after the race, obviously he was showered with praise and he was a hero. Apparently, the stadium went absolutely bonkers when he ran into the Olympic Stadium. Luis was a water carrier at the time. There was no public sewer system. There wasn't a public water supply, okay, in Athens at the time. And so what Luis did was he was actually a water carrier. That was his job. Before he ran the marathon, he would bring water to people. Well, he retired from that job and actually ended up becoming a policeman. So Luis lived out his days, did not engage, from what I can tell, in any competitive running, and was a guest of honor at the 1936 Olympic Games in Berlin. The 1936 Olympic Games in Berlin famously were the games where Hitler tried to show everybody that the Nazis and that Nazi Germany was this amazing place, and tried to put his best foot forward. Hitler decided to have Luis in as a sort of guest of honor. And Luis was really excited about this, and Luis showed up and was showered with praise and really sort of soaked up the moment, So Luis went back home to Greece, and in a bit of irony, of course, in 1940, Greece was actually invaded by Italy, which was one of the Axis powers during World War II, of course, along with Japan and Nazi Germany. Sadly, Luis died very, very shortly within that time frame, living in sort of the early World War II era in Western Europe, where obviously the Axis powers sort of rained terror down on the entire continent. And so Luis passed away in 1940. Interesting, Luis actually was a draft dodger. He actually got in trouble for falsifying documents in 1926 and actually spent a year in prison in 1926, 10 years before the 1936 Olympic Games. And his trophy, he was awarded a trophy in 1896 by the Athens Olympic organizers. And in 2021, it was sold for almost $1 million. So here is Luis's 1896 Olympic trophy that sold for $1 million in 2021. Can you imagine in 1896 if somebody had told him that 125 years later, this trophy that he was awarded was actually going to be worth $1 million to somebody? But it shows you the history, the lore of the marathon, and what it means to people, right? And so you go to 1900. In 1900, the Olympics were held in Paris, France. In 1900, for some reason, and I'm sure I could dig for it and find out, the distance was changed from 24.8 to 25 miles. Go figure, right? And then in 1904, the distance reverted back to 24.8. That Olympics actually was in St. Louis, Missouri. And I think the World's Fair actually was in St. Louis at the same time. Now, that was a wild race. So we had the early leader from Cuba, a guy by the name of Carvajal, and he actually had to drop out of the race because he got violently ill because he stopped and visited some farmers on the side of the road and ate a whole bunch of green apples halfway through the marathon. So Carvajal was out because he got sick from eating green apples. And so then we ended up having the great American duel. We have Fred Lortz, okay, who won initially, okay? And then you had Thomas Hicks. So we have Lortz versus Hicks. Well, we got a problem with Mr. Lortz. Mr. Lortz seems to have gotten the idea from the guy who got third in 1896, who got the carriage. It seems that Mr. Lortz decided to go and ride in a car or a cart. A red car, and that's really interesting. It was 1904, but he rode in a car for part of the race, okay? And he initially crossed the finish line and won, and then was DQ'd when spectators, observers said, wait, this guy rode in a car during the marathon. Mr. Hicks actually won. Now, Thomas Hicks, I think that he could have been a BPN athlete. I think that Mr. Hicks could have probably used a nutritionist. Guys, I can't make this up. Hicks won this marathon and he fueled with strychnine and cognac. Strychnine is fatal in certain amounts. And I don't think it takes a lot of strychnine to kill you. I mean, I stopped using strychnine as sort of a central piece of my diet a few years ago, so I can't remember exactly how much strychnine was going to kill me. But, and then mixing it with cognac. So Mr. Hicks wins an Olympic gold medal and takes strychnine mixed with cognac as his endurance formula. Can you imagine coming out with the strychnine cognac BPN Gojo? Yeah, that's probably not a great idea. All right. I mean, I'm surprised he wasn't like, I don't know, stricken with something. Dad jokes, forgive me. My daughter's probably cringing at this point. So yeah, strychnine and cognac got him a, quote, burst of energy, and he won. And of course, you have Lors, who rode in a car. Apparently, riding in cars and carriages during the Olympic marathon is more frowned upon than drinking poison and booze to win. There you have it. So 1908 in London, we have the Princess of Wales and her kids who are spectating the marathon. 1908, the kids are in the royal nursery, and they want to be able to watch the marathon from the window. So at that point, they said, hey, let's elongate the course so that the runners have to come by so that the kids can watch the race through the window in the royal nursery. And the race was 26.2 miles, and it has never changed. It's 26.2 miles, 42.2 kilometers. That's a standard distance. So when somebody asks you, well, how long was your marathon? The proper response is, there is only one distance to a marathon. It's 26.2 miles / 42.2 K. Anything else is not a marathon. It's just something else. All right. And so in 1908, we had an Italian pastry chef named Dornado Pietri, who started collapsing as he entered Olympic Stadium. And apparently what happened was there was multiple participants who came into the stadium. They were running the wrong way around the track. And poor Pietri actually collapsed. And so either some race officials or spectators or people in his camp, maybe coaches or trainers, actually picked Pietri up, carried him the last few meters and across the finish line, and he was adorned with the wreath, won the Olympic gold medal, and then to quote the great ESPN commentators, not so fast, my friend. So the United States said, hold on just a minute. You don't get to pick a guy up and carry him across the line. We don't care if it's 10 meters. We don't care if it's 15 meters. You can't do that. And so a guy by the name of Johnny Hayes actually finished second, came across the line, and the Olympic officials took a look at it. They agreed. They disqualified our poor Italian pastry chef and awarded the gold medal to good old Johnny Hayes from the United States. 2:55.18, but that is 26.2 miles. That's about 6:44 pace, 6:45 pace, right? And that was the winner of the 1908 marathon. That has been the marathon distance ever since. And so a fun footnote and a fun answer to the trivia question is, who won the world's first 26.2 mile marathon, which is the actual marathon? The answer is Johnny Hayes for the United States of America, 2 hours, 55 minutes, and 18 seconds. Listen, in my 24 years, I've coached every distance, but I have an undeniable love affair with the thing that we call the marathon. Now, it's not as simple as just showing up to the starting line, gun goes off, and you take off running. You need to be properly fueled. You have to keep your electrolytes topped off. And how are you going to do that? Through the use of what I call the BPN Marathon Stack. And it starts pre-race. BPN Go Bar, 200 calories, 36 grams of carbohydrate, easily digestible, boom, instant energy boost. G1M Sport Plus, it has that perfect combination of carbohydrates in the form of cluster dextrin, and then of course 350 milligrams of sodium. But we've added nootropics for mental acuity and sharpness. And then of course we have caffeine, which is a mild performance enhancer. And then good old-fashioned G1M Sport, that great combination of carbohydrates and sodium. You can drink it before the race. You can also drink it during the race in your bottles to keep you going. But it all comes together with two big things. You have your Go Gels and you have your electrolytes. BPN electrolytes come in a wide array of flavors. 500 milligrams of sodium per pop, which is going to help stave off those cramps and those bonks that come in the late stages of a hard marathon. But man, it's the BPN Go gels. These are the best gels on the market, and you get them in both non-caffeinated and caffeinated flavors. At the end of the day, for you to have the race you dreamed of, for you to have the race that you prepared for, you've got to take care of your body. The BPN Marathon Stack is the way to go. So go to bpnsubs.com and order your Marathon Stack today. You know, the marathon has had I don't want to say a sordid past, but it's had a conflicted relationship with various populations, with various ideas, because the marathon is part of the culture. And so if you think about it, it makes sense that the marathon, who participates in it, who's been allowed to participate in it, has sort of evolved with the cultural norms, has evolved with mostly, and I'm going to say Western, cultural practices, even though obviously the marathon is incredibly popular, in fact, possibly more popular in places like Japan than maybe even the United States. But it's had its hiccups. Women were not allowed to participate in the marathon at all for decades and decades and decades. I would like to point out that the Olympic Games did not allow women to participate in anything over 1,500 meters until 1984. Think about that. 1,500 meters is not even a full English mile. You're looking at 1980 in Moscow. You're looking at 1976 in Montreal, 72 in Munich, right? 1960 in Rome. Women weren't allowed to run anything over 1,500 meters prior to 1984, okay? And in 1984, we had the first women's Olympic marathon. But before that, women were allowed limitedly to participate in marathons. Now, in 1967, Catherine Switzer was the first woman to, quote unquote, officially finish a marathon. Now, Switzer knew that she wasn't going to be allowed to run, and she wanted to run the Boston Marathon. So she actually entered under K.V. Switzer, KV Switzer, her initials. At that time, you were allowed to register in that fashion. So she registered for the Boston Marathon. She takes off running, and she's with a friend, and I believe her boyfriend, who was a big strapping athlete, big guy. And the race officials of Boston caught wind of this, and they said, no, this ain't going to happen. And so many of us may have seen this famous picture on the internet with this incredibly enraged man lunging at Catherine Switzer, literally trying to tackle her and physically assault her to remove her from the streets of Boston. And she got and he got hip checked by Switzer's boyfriend, and Switzer sort of ran in a protective cocoon with men around her, and she was escorted to the finish. Now, I love the fact that this misguided race official from the Boston Marathon was named Jock Simple. I mean, seriously, this guy's name is Jock Simple. I mean, you can imagine. So old Jock, J-O-C-K is how it's spelled, right? So old Jock, I wonder if his middle name was Strap. But anyway, so old Jock gets pissed. Boy, he was big mad. And you can imagine, I'm Jock Simple, and ain't no woman running no marathon. And so he runs out there. I mean, as if he was somehow personally hurt by Catherine Switzer running down the road in Boston, Massachusetts. I mean, the idea is so ridiculous, but this is 1967, right? And so old Jock, he got hip checked, and he probably was a dumb jock. He probably is a very, very simple, pitiful man. But there you have it. Jock Simple. He didn't want no woman running no marathon. But 1966, actually, we got to give big shout out, big props to Bobby Gibb. Bobby Gibb actually unofficially ran the Boston Marathon in 1966, but she didn't actually enter because remember, Switzer entered, KV Switzer, and she had a race bib and everything, right? But Bobby actually ran 3:21 in 1966. So everybody who knows anything, especially for all of you ladies trying to qualify for the Boston Marathon, 3:21 probably resonates with a lot of you. That's 7:40 pace, right? That was pretty solid. And so you go and you look and you say, okay, well, what happened after Jock Simple getting big mad? The AAU, the Amateur Athletics Union in the United States, actually banned women from officially participating in marathons. And it's interesting because in 1972, if you're a fan of the sport, and you're a fan of track and field and athletics, you might remember Steve Prefontaine, the late, great Steve Prefontaine, and his fight with the AAU over the professional status of runners and the inability for runners to actually make money, because AAU, the first letter, A, stands for amateur, right? And in fact, the IAAF, which is the governing body for all track and field and cross country and road racing in the world, it still says IAAF. The second letter, the A, is actually amateur. They've kept it in there, even though it's not amateur anymore, right? And so in 1972, while Steve Prefontaine is engaged in his own fight with the AAU on allowing people to get paid for winning races, the AAU, in their infinite wisdom, banned women from running in marathons. I mean, the idea of that is so incredibly mind-boggling now, knowing what we know about road racing, marathoning. I mean, heck, we've got NIL, we've got revenue share now at our nation's top universities, and women are being paid to run at the university level and are running marathons every weekend in the thousands in the United States. 1974, that short-lived ban ended. And Catherine Switzer clearly trained her ass off, won the New York Marathon, and let me make sure that I got this right. 1974, she ran a 3:07. And so Catherine got over an hour faster, specifically an hour and 13 minutes faster than her time in the Boston Marathon several years prior. That still lags way behind the men's performers. I went and I looked, and the men's winner in the New York Marathon ran 2:26, okay, in 1974. So you're looking, at running 41 minutes slower was the women's time behind the men's time in New York. Catherine went on in 1975 and actually took second in the Boston Marathon, and Switzer actually ran a 2:51, which is really, really solid. You could see she trained. She proved that women aren't frail. She proved that women are not too fragile to do this. And you might be asking yourself, hell, Catherine got second in 2:51. Who won? 2:42 actually won the race in 1975 in Boston. It was Leanne Winter, okay? She, I believe, was West German. I could be mistaken. 1975, 2:42. That was the world record at the time. That was the first time they started really keeping track of records. So in 1975, the women's world record was 2:42. I was 5 months old when she ran that. So you start looking at the progression and, how did this play out in the years to come, right? We had Phidippides do his thing. Then we finally ran 26.2. He ran 2:58. Hicks wins it over the first full marathon distance in 1908. Where did we get? Well, I went back and I looked and said, let's look at the progression of this, and let's look at how women and men's participation in the world's great marathons in the biggest cities sort of progressed over time. In 1960, the great fabled Abibi Bikila from Ethiopia ran 2:15.16 at the Rome Olympic Games. What is so remarkable of this, and you can still find footage of this on the internet, I will never forget it. He finished in the dark, and Bikila ran barefooted. Can you imagine running barefooted through the streets of Rome? Because it wasn't just asphalt. We can assume that there was cobblestones, right? But Bikila had grown up running in East Africa. And Bikila didn't run in running shoes when he was coming up in his formative years and when he was progressing as a runner. So Bikila went to the 1960 Olympics in Rome and ran barefooted, won the race in a world record of 2:15:17. Okay. And at that time, the women weren't allowed to run the marathon at the Olympics. So that was it. The marathon was just men. Okay. You go to 1970 and you say, okay, in 10 years, where did we end up getting? Ron Hill from Great Britain ran 2:09:28. So going into the year 1970, the world record was 2:09:28 from Ron Hill from Great Britain. And then Etta Boitano. Etta Boitano was an American, and she ran a race in Petaluma, California, and she ran 3:57:42, okay? And so in 1970, 3:57 was actually the official world record. And then keep in mind, by the time we got to 75, like I said, that world record was 2:42 for the women. So in 1970, the world record was 3:57 for women, 2:09 for the men. So you're looking at what, an hour and 50-minute difference between the world records? That's absolutely insane. But it changes quickly. 1980, Gerard Norbar from Holland, actually, he was a Dutch guy, had the world record. He had dropped it to 2:09:01. So it's interesting, in a decade, it only went down a minute. But the women, Greta Weitz, the great Greta Weitz from Norway, took it down to 2:25:41. She ran that at the New York Marathon, okay? But not so fast, my friend. The New York Marathon was 140 meters short that year. And so Weitz was stripped of her world record, and Joyce Smith from Great Britain actually ended up being awarded the world record. She ran 2:30:27 actually in Tokyo, right? So the women's world record now is at 2:30. The men's world record is at 2:09. We're within 21 minutes now, right? And this is what, 1980, right? Let's talk about the Norwegians. The Norwegians have been disproportionately impactful on the sport of marathoning than perhaps any other nation in the world. When you look at the 1980s especially, two of the greatest marathoners in history, and the two, I would say, of the top 4 marathoners in the world were both Norwegians, Ingrid Kristiansen and Greta Weitz. Kristiansen, I actually just recently listened to a podcast that she did, was sort of regaling all of us with the tales of how she trained. Kristiansen famously trained almost exclusively on a treadmill during the winter because in Norway, the winters were so severe and Kristiansen couldn't run outside a lot of the winter. So in training for some spring marathons, right? Boston Marathon in April, if you're running a marathon at some point in March somewhere, in Norway, those are pretty tough conditions. So Kristiansen did a ton of her training actually on a treadmill indoors in the early 1980s. Greta Weitz was this gritty little runner. I'll never forget watching the New York Marathon. The New York Marathon and the Boston Marathon were literally must-see TV when I was a kid. And I think that maybe it's the evolution of television. We have, ESPN, ESPNU, we have ESPN2, we have ESPN Plus, then we have Fox Sports Southwest, we have the NFL Network, the Golf Channel. You get the picture. So it's very, very diffuse. We have so many options, but you have to understand, even in the 1980s, we had ABC, NBC, CBS, and that was really pretty much it when it came to network. And then Fox came along a little bit later, right? And so the New York Marathon was must-see TV, and the Boston Marathon was must-see TV. And I remember huddled around the TV watching Vites. She had eaten something, something wasn't good, and I'll never forget. She actually went to the restroom on herself, and it was literally flowing down her legs. And I remember guys on the media motorcycle actually slowed down and pulled up next to Vites, and they were handing her tissues and paper towels off the back of the motorcycle so that she could sort of clean herself up. But I mean, Vites was rolling. I mean, we're talking about a lady that's running 5:30, 5:40 pace, right? And she refused to let up, and she refused to drop out. She refused to quit, and Vites went on and won. And that is one of my formative moments. I remember when I sat and I thought, man, this marathon business is tough. This marathon business, this is a different deal. And here's this diminutive, just a tiny little Norwegian, and she just shredded everybody, man. But, there are formative moments in my marathon watching and coaching and participation career. But the 1984 Olympics, I think for so many people, in so many ways, was this sort of seminal moment that's etched in our memories forever. Now, remember, in 1980, the United States boycotted the Olympic Games, okay? They were held in Moscow. We're at the height of the Cold War, right? And we did not go to the Olympic Games in 1980 in Moscow. And so we had a nation of track and field athletes, a nation of marathoners. We had a nation of athletes in all other sports, whether it's gymnastics or swimming, who had their Olympic dream robbed from them. We actually had a U.S. Olympic trials in 1980. But after we had the trials, we announced that we were not going to send a team. And there was no option. USA Track and Field, the U.S. Track Federation, the independent federations for fencing, boxing, it didn't really matter because we had the U.S. Olympic Committee, okay, and then we had the U.S. federal government, and they weren't allowed to go. And so we had a generation of runners between 1976 and 1984, okay, 1980 came and went, and they had their dreams stripped from them. 1984, the Soviet bloc returned the favor. They boycotted our Olympics in 1984, right? So no Soviet Union, and back then it was the Soviet Union. Remember, it wasn't Russia. So you had all of the Soviet republics, including the Ukraine, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, all part of the Soviet Union at the time. Nobody came. Onto the stage steps Joan Benoit Samuelson. Joan Benoit Samuelson actually was obviously one of our top runners in the United States, right? But Joan Benoit Samuelson had a problem. Joan Benoit Samuelson had a knee that was not cooperating. 17 days before the Olympic Games, Joan Benoit Samuelson had surgery to remove plica from her knee. Plica is basically just a piece of gristle that should dissolve in infancy or maybe when you're a toddler, but there's a certain small percentage of people for whom it doesn't dissolve, right? Well, Joni's knee hurt. They went in and they excised this piece of gristle from her knee. Joni goes out and runs 2:24, wins the LA Olympic Games in 1984. I, to this day, will never forget sitting in a hotel on vacation with my family somewhere in the Southeast in 1984. I think we were in Florida. We might have been in Panama City, Florida. I think that's where we were, watching Joni enter the stadium, okay, to just a thunderous roar of 85, 90,000 people going berserk. This American woman was about to win the very, very first Olympic marathon. There was not one held in 70, 76, 80. Women weren't even allowed to run the 5K, the 10K. Are you kidding me? The 3,000 meter steeplechase? No way, man. In 1984, we had the first marathon. Now, Greta Weitz was in that race. Greta Weitz was considered the favorite. and Greta Weitz was beaten by Joan Benoit Samuelson. And so when you look at the progression of the marathon, this shows you how remarkable that performance was by Joni in the Cold War era, the first marathon ever run, and an American woman wins it. Sifan Hassan just won the 2024 Olympics. She's the great Dutch marathoner who is well known for her hilarious interviews after marathons, where she's been known to, lament her decision to run marathons. She said one time, she started crying the night before the race, and I think what she says is, "What, are you crazy? What, are you an idiot? An idiot? Is there something wrong with me?" Sifan is great. She won the Olympics in an Olympic record in 2:22. In 2024, guys, think about this. We have gels, we have electrolyte replacement drinks, we have carbon-plated racers, we have a nation and we have a world that's enthralled with the distance. We have people who are training harder than they've ever trained. And Joan Benoit Samuelson only ran 2 minutes slower in 1984 than what Sifan Hassan did when she set the Olympic record, in 40 years later. That's absolutely remarkable. I had the pleasure of sharing an elevator with Joni at the Boston Marathon just 2 springs ago. Super pleasant. Still running. Can still go out and run a good marathon, which is remarkable. Nothing over 1,500 had ever been run. One footnote to the 1984 Olympics. I will never forget sitting in an Econo Lodge in Mobile, Alabama, frustrated because the pool was closed down and there was actually crabs in the bottom of the pool in the Econo Lodge in Mobile in August of 1984. Don't ask me why I remember that. And sitting in my hotel room, watching this showdown between America's running sweetheart, Mary Decker Slaney, and a barefooted teenage Zola Budd from South Africa in the 3,000. Mary ran for Athletics West, and Mary ran for the same team, the same club, sponsored by Nike, that Joan Benoit Samuelson did. Mary was tripped by her foil, Zola Budd. To this day, there's people that believe that Zola tripped her on purpose. I've watched the video 1,000 times over. In fact, I watched it many, many times there in 1984 when I was 10 years old, sitting in a motel room in Mobile. Zola didn't trip her on purpose, but Mary went down, injured, fell into the infield. It was a devastating moment because a whole nation, frankly, was rooting for Mary Decker Slaney in that 3,000-meter race. She was America's sweetheart. She was the face of U.S. middle distance and distance running. To be honest with you, I was devastated. She was amazing. She had just won the first World Championships in 1983 in Rome. In the 3,000, she was considered widely probably the best middle distance runner in the world, and she fell. Bud fell apart. Bud emotionally was really distraught as boos and jeers rained down on her if she circled the lap, one lap after another during the LA Coliseum. And I think it was Marisica Puica, actually from Romania, who won the race. So you're sitting there as a disappointed nation. I had just started running little road races. I ran my very first race in 1984 in the Tyler Azalea Trails 2 mile on a brick street. And so here I am getting fascinated by these personalities and the drama and the soap opera. And Mary Slaney is lying there on the infield bawling. The pictures on the front of Sports Illustrated and newspapers for literally years, and you can still find the famous picture of her husband running into the infield and holding Mary in his arms. So this was our feeling going in, and then the marathon happens, and it's just like, hallelujah, holy mackerel, this is amazing. Joan Benoit Samuelson, 17 days after knee surgery, goes and beats the great Greta Weitz, runs 2:24. Obviously, it's an Olympic record. It's never been held before. And so you take a look at that, and then you get into the late 80s and 1990s, right? In 1990, okay, the men world record ended up going down to 2:08:16. The great Ibrahim Hussein from Kenya, okay? And then the great Norwegian Christensen broke the world record going into 1990. Ingrid ran 2:21. So now the difference in the world record, okay, is 13 minutes. 13 minutes in 1990, when 20 years before, the difference between the men's and the women's world record was an hour 50 minutes, right? What I love about marathoning is, like I told you, it's the melting pot. It is people from different ethnicities, different backgrounds, different countries, right? And so in 2000, there was the great Moroccan distance runner, Khalid Kanouchi, broke the world record. He ran it actually in late 1999. He ran 2:05:42. Well, Khalid applied for U.S. citizenship. And Khalid on May 2nd, 2000, actually was awarded U.S. citizenship, and Khalid immigrated to the United States. Why do I love this story? Because it's a quintessentially American story, right? We have the Statue of Liberty. All of my family immigrated here from Italy, actually in 1896, the year of the very first Olympic marathon. My family on my mother's side all came from Italy, got off the boat in Ellis Island, and then they settled on the Northeast coast. Well, here we are in the year 2000. Here's this Moroccan gentleman who broke the world record, became a U.S. citizen. So he goes to the Chicago Marathon and runs 2:05:18. Guys, when I tell you that Samuelson and Kanouchi are absolutely remarkable, I mean this. Khalid Kanouchi, to this day, still has the American record in the marathon. Now, Ryan Hall has run a faster marathon in 2:04, but it was considered an aided course. And so we have, even though it's not necessarily an illegal course, we have a couple of different ways that we do records in the marathon. We have marathons where the finish line is below the start, and then we have marathons where the finish line is not below the start. Now, as insane as it sounds, the Boston Marathon is considered an aided course. Anybody who's run the Boston Marathon knows that that's a hard course because of the Newton Hills, the way it's structured, because you're running downhill, pounding your quads to death for 16 miles. But Connor Mantz, this past year, I sat there right on Boylston Street in the stands and watched Connor run 2:05:08. But technically speaking, that doesn't count as the American record because the finish line's below the start. Kanouchi, 25 years later now, still has the American record at 2:05:18. Now in 2000, when we're looking at the women, Tekla Larope ended up breaking the world record from Kenya. She ran 2:20:43. So now the women's world record in the marathon is only 15 minutes behind the men by the time we get to the year 2000. Right? And so what you see is the men are getting faster. I mean, look at Kanouchi running 2:05, right? But you look at the fact that the record 20, 30 years prior, right, was 2:09, and the men had improved it by 4 minutes in that time because men had been running marathons since 1896 in officially sanctioned marathons and in Olympic Games. Well, the women, late to the task, but up for the task, are massive aerobic machines, and we know this from a physiologic standpoint. The women are catching up. The women are catching up, right? And, you know, you look at Samuelson and you look at the great Norwegians, Weitz and Christensen, and then, of course, the great Rosa Mota from Portugal. And you see these women who were the pioneers in the sport. And, of course, Katrin Switzer started it all. The 2004 Olympic Games really resonates with me. Now, you have to understand, from 1993 to 1996, that was my collegiate career. Okay? And so at the time, when I ran at the NCAA championships in Fayetteville, Arkansas, in the fall of 1994, there was this great little runner who ran for the University of Arkansas, and her name was Dina Drawson. And then there was the diminutive Ethiopian immigrant who is an American citizen, Mebrotin Kefleski, graduated from San Diego High School and went on to run for Coach Bob Larson at UCLA. Well, fast forward to 2004, and we had been living in a wasteland of American marathoning. The Kenyans and the Ethiopians were surging. We go all the way back to Bakila in 1960, right? Winning the Olympic marathon in Rome. And you see Tegla Larope from Kenya breaking the world record. You see Kanuchi from Morocco breaking the world record before he came to the U.S., right? And so the North Africans, the Algerians, the Moroccans, and the East Africans began dominating in the distance events, right? And so we lived in a veritable wasteland of success in the United States in distances from the 1500 all the way to the marathon for the entirety of my youth. I mean, I loved American distance runners and like the great Lynn Jennings, for instance, and the Mary Decker Slaneys and the Joan Benoit Samuelsons, right? But the reality of it is we were not, after 1984 when Joni did it, we were not winning medals at global championships. We were really struggling. And so in 2004, Mebrotin Kefleski, who I ran against in college, and Dina Drawson, then Dina Castor, got married. They were both coached by the same coach, Bob Larson. They showed up, you guessed it, in Athens, Greece in 2004. And I will never forget screaming and yelling and pleading at the television. Now, Coach Larson was smart. It was bloody hot that day in Athens in 2004. And so he had Meb and Dina wearing cold vests with ice water in them, things that are fairly commonplace now, but people weren't doing back then. And trained hard on the hills, trained hard in the heat, did a lot of heat mitigation factors, right? Well, everything was going swimmingly until Meb goes out for a run a few days before the games in Athens and gets attacked by dogs. I can't make this up. So Meb actually suffered a dog attack and actually was bitten and actually was hurt prior to towing the line in 2004. He ran a brilliant race. He went in ranked 39th and ran a brilliant race, absolutely brilliant race, masterfully perfect race. If any of you have heard me about the wrath of 1,000 fire-breathing dragons if you run imprudently at the beginning of marathons, apparently Coach Larson gave Meb the same speech. They went with a wonderful strategy, and Meb ran from behind and picked off one after another, after another, after another. And Meb ended up taking the silver medal in 2004, and it was the first American to win a medal in the marathon, and I don't know how long. Probably the first since Frank Shorter did it. And so then the women's race comes, and Dina goes and does the same thing. She gets third and wins the bronze medal. We had a male and a woman win a medal at the Olympic Games for the first time in decades. And it's really, really emotional because I was in college with these two runners. I ran in the same races with these two runners. Well, the same race with Meb. Dina was in the women's race at the NCAA championship in 1994. So you fast forward to 2010 and you say, where did these records go? Where are the world records now, right? Well, the great Ethiopian dynamo is what his nickname was, Haile Gebrselassie, who was literally pound for pound maybe the greatest distance runner of all time. He and Said Ouida from Morocco. Fight me on that one, people who are in the know. Gebrselassie runs 2:03:59, which was unthinkably fast at the time. And then the great Paula Radcliffe from Great Britain ran 2:15:25. Yes, the women's world record was now only 12 and a half minutes slower than the men's. The women were coming. I remember when Paula ran that. That was one of the most astonishing races I'd ever seen. I mean, here we were with the world record being 2:30, right? Only a couple, 2.5, 3 decades prior. And now the women's record was 2:15. And in that span, the men's world record had only come down 6 minutes, right? And so then we go to 2020, the great Eliud Kipchoge, 2:01:39, and then we had Bridget Kosgei from Kenya at 2:14:04. Now, Kelvin Kiptum, the late great Kelvin Kiptum, has it at 2 hours 35 minutes. Kelvin, we'll never forget that. It was just literally a couple of years ago when he ran 2 hours at Chicago. I'll never forget looking at his coach just standing there with his arms wide open, waiting for Kelvin to come across the line. And I remember he just grabbed Kelvin and hugged him and just picked him up. And it was just the most emotional embrace. Kelvin apparently was very, very well liked. He was very loved. But Kelvin died in a car accident and had never met his potential. I think all of us really lament that because Kelvin was very young, and there was no doubt in our minds that I think Kelvin was going to run probably 1:58, 1:59 in the marathon. And I'm sad that I never got to see that come to fruition. But God bless the late great Kelvin Kiptum, right? Frustrating note, Ruth Chepngetich. Ruth Chepngetich is a Kenyan lady that ran 2:09:56 at the Chicago Marathon just this past year in 2024. If I'm being honest with you guys, you look at what's possible and you want to dream what's possible. And I've spent a lot of my career telling everybody, dream big, you're going to work hard, you're going to accomplish a lot. So I felt almost guilty not being excited at all about Ruth's 2:09:56. And I think that there were a lot of people in the know on that one that looked at that last fall, and sadly, she got popped for having actually hydrochlorothiazide in her system a few weeks ago, which is a masking agent that's actually used to mask the use of banned substances. So the World Anti-Doping Agency, which is WADA, actually has hydrochlorothiazide, which is actually a diuretic, right? On the banned list, and the levels were so astronomically high that there was actually no medical purpose for it being there. And so, Ruth did that. Now, Ruth did not flunk a drug test after the 2:09:56. So the 2:09:56 is still in place, but you can understand the side eye that I think a lot of us have, with respect to that performance. We're going to call it dubious, okay? It's interesting because we have this fascination in the United States, in the marathon space, obviously with running the world majors. Really, really exciting. They just added Sydney as one of the world majors, right? So we now have 7 what are referred to as world major marathons in the United States. We've got Boston, we've got New York, and in Chicago, right? And then you have other majors such as Berlin. You've got Tokyo, you've got London, but now we've got Sydney, and it was just run a few weeks ago, and that's really exciting. But when it comes to qualifying for the Olympics, we have a lot of different ways a lot of different countries do it. The reality of it is there's only 2 countries in the world who are the major players in the marathon world who actually have a standalone Olympic trials. I think a lot of people would be surprised by that. We, in the United States, it's just sort of part of our running culture. We're in the chase right now. It's marathon season. I've got a lot of runners who I coach, and I've got lots of friends in the coaching business who have a ton of young men and young women who are chasing that Olympic trials qualifier so they can get into the United States Olympic trials race, which will be held in early 2028, right? And we then pick our team with the top 3 finishers for the purposes of this conversation. There's some there are some side notes to that, and there's some caveats. But for the purposes of this conversation, the top 3 runners in the Olympic trials go to the Olympic Games. Japan is the only other country in the world that has a standalone Olympic trials. So it's pretty cool. And when I say the only other country in the world, I mean the countries that are major players in the marathon space. The North American countries, South American countries, Western European countries, East African, Asian countries, most of the ones, the Kenyas, the Ethiopias, the Japans, Germany, Great Britain, Norway, Canada, the United States. Japan and the U.S. are the only ones that have a standalone Olympic trials. And so when we look at the marathon and when we look at the global impact of where we are and where we're going, it's growing. I don't think that anybody in 1896 would have ever envisioned, in that first Olympic marathon with 17 participants, that we would be where we are now with 50,000 people on the streets of Berlin, 50,000 people on the streets of London, 20 to 25,000 people on the streets of Boston. And then you even go to these other races. I mean, you look at Indianapolis, you got 6,000, 7,000 people at Indianapolis. You have the Houston Marathon is massive. And then all these wonderful marathons worldwide, everywhere from Sydney to Johannesburg, to Munich, to Zurich, to Manila, right? And Mexico City, right? And you start realizing that this is a movement. This is a movement that is not just sport. This is multiculturalism. This is compassion. This is toughness. This is grit. This is some people doing it because they're fighting for their lives, right? You go and win $150,000 when you win a big marathon, and you come from a family that might be making $4,000, $5,000 a year max. You can imagine the transformative effect that being able to lace up a pair of running shoes and go to a starting line, and you can change your life. You can run for other people's lives through charity. You can run in memory of other people, right? And everybody is doing it together. And in 1896, if I had been able to go back and tell them in Greece, 17 people, 17 people will look at us now, will realize that the marathon is part of our culture. It's part of our collective domestic and international consciousness. It's part of indelible socio-political movements. It's part of indelible socio-political moments. And it has served as inspiration. Joan Benoit Samuelson, on a knee that was operated on 17 days later. You look at Meb Keflezighi, who comes to the United States from Ethiopia and runs his high school track at San Diego High School, and then goes and gets a silver medal at the Olympic Games. This is what marathoning can do. This is what marathoning means. And I love it. I want you all to love it. And I can't wait to be able to be here, coach many of you, impact as many of you as I can, talk to you about my favorite race, my favorite passion, and inspire everybody to be their best selves, inspire everybody to use the marathon as a conduit through which they achieve self-actualization, self-confidence, and just get an immense sense of pride. And so with that, I'm so happy that I was able to share this episode with you guys. And as usual, I want everybody to go be good, but more importantly, let's go be consistently good. Coach out.